So this is a little bit sort of in between the lines. There's no right or wrong answers. You're not going to get marked for this. But I thought I'd ask you guys, and I want to introduce Jeffrey to introduce himself first. And then I think we've heard a lot of different content and things that we need to look out for. And I know it can be a little bit overwhelming. It can be like, yeah, what about value proposition, about scaling, what about model, about all those metrics, what about Quanda, they got this, and what about IP and data? It can be quite a little bit overwhelming. So in like 30 seconds or a minute, what are some of the key ingredients for success that you look for? Is there a secret sauce that you've seen, or is there's no silver bullet, we understand that, but are there some ingredients and metrics that you think, do you know what, I think this works? I mean, for you, Pier Paolo, obviously, being part of Quandu, being part of that journey, what's some of the magic? What's some of the things that have, I know, and things that haven't worked? You know, and again, you guys have all got completely different perspectives and angles, so I thought that might be a good question to open up with. And I'm going to start with Jeffrey. Jeffrey, love you to introduce yourself. Fantastic guy, fantastic firm.
I was just going to see if you can hear me. So yeah, my name is Jeffrey Foston. I'm a partner at Jensen Funding Partners. We are a SES and EIS fund. We've been around for about 6 years, and we have about 100 SES companies on our belt. In terms of success, you know, it's a bit of like what Seb said. It's not necessarily what, it can be a checkbox, is also things that you make sure that they almost don't have. The two things for me that I think are really important is, exactly like Seb said, is one is being able to solve a problem and being able to articulate that very well and very early on in the conversation. But also it's about the team and them being able to execute a plan. If we don't see these two things, you know, at very early stages, then it's probably not going to be going very far anytime soon. I think those two things are probably the key things for us that we look for. Yeah.
And I mean, it's like a very relevant point, because even from my perspective, what I was going to say, people, and probably I will put people at the top of the list, to be honest with you. I was part of the acquisition back in the days after the bubble when Yahoo bought Kelco, and I was at Kelco, and I was involved in that process. And essentially, Yahoo decided to buy Kelco for 450 million euros, which was one of the biggest acquisitions back in the days. First of all, because we had a great management team. That was the first thing. So people, first of all, you touch on unique selling proposition, you touch on unique value proposition as well, which I think it's really relevant in terms of solving a problem and be relevant to users. And then I'd say I was working for an incubator before starting my journey at Quandu, and you know, we were even in small numbers, small absolute numbers, but if we were getting to see in a deck, in a presentation, some growth and the curve going up, there was a good indicator. In terms of challenges and probably tips is, as I said in my presentation, probably the prioritize. I know it might sound very, very obvious, but you know, many companies failed because of that, and because they wanted to prove they were doing lots of projects, lots of stuff, and they were not able to execute the strategy because they were distracted.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I guess I would split it into, are you a business that's wanting to attract venture funding, or are you another type of business? Because venture funded businesses, despite getting all of the PR, are actually a very small proportion of number of businesses founded. If you're a venture funded business, then you absolutely have to have a massive market, and you need to be addressing that with whatever that product is. And then it comes down to the team. I mean, there's nothing more than, particularly at the early stage, the team. And I mean, we could all say that, but we're all probably going to say that repeatedly. But it's just the team. The team is everything. And if you're venture-backed, a big market. If you're not venture-backed, then you can make fantastic businesses that are profitable, throw off good amounts of profit, net profit each year that you can dividend out, and have a great business. And you still need a good team for that. But you know, you need a big market for venture-backed business, and that's actually where I've seen the businesses come unstuck, even with fantastic teams. They just their product just was not attracting enough traction in a big market.
Yeah, for me, I suppose as a lawyer over the years, working with entrepreneurs, investors, and the SMEs, What I do like to see, what impresses me, and I think impresses the investors as well, is that the founders and the core team members, they're passionate about their business, of course, but they also understand the regulations and the laws that apply to their business model and keep abreast of it. They have an interest, and they don't just turn away when you want to address these things. They'll go in, and if you tell them to go and look at the IPO or the ICO website and skill themselves up if they don't have any skills, they'll go away and do it. So it's really good feedback, and it's very reassuring as well. And that's not just for me. I think that comes across in presentations and pitches too. So that always helps.
And that trumps question 2, which was all about the team. So, but I mean, I think great to have consistency in answers and think, because, we're getting it straight from metaphorically the horse's mouth here, which is brilliant. In terms of team, could you expand on that a little bit? Because a team might mean different things. So are we talking about the founding team? Are we talking about C-suite? Are you guys looking at the wider infrastructure to have around them in terms of a support network, suppliers, directors, NEDs? Or is it really about the core team? What does a team mean? If some of these guys in the room are sitting here saying, do you know what, we've got some traction, we've proven a concept, we're market ready, we want to scale, what kind of things are you looking for in a team? I think it was Yusuf that mentioned, you've got, is it the enigmatic CEO that's the big visionary, or does that not really matter? You're not looking for the vision, or you're looking more for the numbers and the metrics, and the CFO, is he as important as I don't want to go into deep dive too much, but what does team mean? Because I've had a couple of conversations during the break where people are saying, well, yeah, we've got the sales team looking at this and the CEO looking at that, and is it about how the team works? Is it a dynamic? Could you expand that a little bit more? Again, Pier Paolo, you've been through this a few times. You've mentioned great teams. Why were they a great team?
Yeah. Fight for the mic. Yeah. Everyone's shying away. Who wants it first? I think when we're looking at a team and it being a good team, I think it changes whether it's early stage or late stage, and obviously everyone here is early. And at early stage, it's the C level and the founders are the same thing, but it's that whoever's setting the strategy is key. They have to have a vision or an insight that others don't have, and that's where the domain expertise reference comes in. But it's all about ultimately execution in the long term. And so the team has to initially start with a strategic insight and ideally maintain their strategic insight as it changes over time. But then the team has to be good at execution. And I use Alex Chessman as a fantastic example because the guy has, and we haven't backed him, so I'm not biased at all. He founded Tails.com, he founded Zoopla, both businesses that were working in the US, took the idea and executed it superbly in the UK and made them worth hundreds of millions each. And so it was all about the execution and building a team around him and building connections. And it wasn't about being connected at the beginning, it was about going out there and seeking that network. So for me, it's those two things. It's that strategic direction and the ability to execute. And often the first is domain expertise and the second is, well, your experience, really.
Yeah, from my perspective, and probably from a acquisition of more businesses in a more advanced phase, like it happened where Yahoo and Kelco back in the days. At Kelco, we also bought one of our biggest competitors in France. Essentially, we bought 5 years ago the management team. And what I mean by that is CEO, essentially, as you rightly said, setting the strategy, the visionary guy, but also very earth-oriented, process-driven, lots of details. CFO, not just reporting numbers, but the ability of the CFO to go behind numbers and add in a commentary and tell a story behind the numbers because the investors can read the numbers by themselves. Really important. CRO, commercial revenue officer, really solid strategy. You touch on lead and pipeline. It's absolutely crucial. And then I also think from a product and technical perspective, really strong expertise and experience for the VP, Chief of Product, and the CTO.
I guess my experience is slightly different in that we back very, very early stage companies, so the team structure we look for is slightly different. I guess the first thing, it has to be a team, i.e. not an individual person, because we always want someone to be able to tell the other person, no, that's wrong, let's do it this way, and have that fight. And that we think is absolutely important. In terms of the team, and of course it can be a minimum of 2, it really just has to be a balance. You know, you can have someone who's strong on product and someone who's strong on sales, but have between the 2 or 3 of them covering all the key bases, which for us obviously is, you know, having the product, the sales, and then someone who can just kind of tie everything together, really. I think that's really, in terms of, at our stage, that's probably the really key things that we look for, just having that joint group balance. A lot of times we find, you know, we see a lot of companies that will have a great product guy and no salesperson, and then they will just spend all of the time just tinkering away and not trying to raise any sales. And then we have the opposite, where we have these great sales guys come in from sales backgrounds, and then they, you know, they give 2 cents to the actual product itself, and they get creamed in terms of, you know, developers and paying lots of money for it. It really has to be that balance, I think. Yeah.
Can I just add something on the metrics, because you asked that specifically? So obviously I laboured the metrics in my deck, and metrics are something that everyone at the top of the company should be obsessed about. Not one person, not the CFO. It should be the CEO, the CFO, the CRO, the COO. Everybody at the top level should be all over those metrics, because they apply to every single one of those. And it's more of a culture than it is an individual thing. Like when I say the founders, it could be the founders, the founding team, the top executive level should be metric obsessed. But then below that is, I think, what we're all saying.
I'd just say my experience really is more at the startup and the scale-up stage. Over the years, lots of friendships have evolved with the creative entrepreneurs, and with that can go charisma and chaos. And scaling up, there's more defined roles, delegation, and that brings with it the opportunity to find people who are more specialized and take responsibility for more areas of the business. So the team, for me, it expands from there, and it does include your legal advisors and your accountants as well. And what I do is try to find the right fit for people. My firm isn't necessarily the right fit for all businesses, of course. But I do tend to find that a business will come along and say, we're not getting the service that we need. With somebody that we're off their radar because we're too small. Or conversely, our service provider can't actually provide the services because they're not specialized enough. So the team also involves being selective about who you choose to be your legal advisors and your accountants.
So fantastic, well-rounded answers again. And I think the culture piece is really huge. I think, you know, when often from an agency perspective, I shouldn't be answering my own question, but from an agency, I'm gonna, because I've got the microphone. I think from an agency perspective, we often get asked to come in and, you know, create sales funnels or deliver a technology piece. But then when you start to talk with the CEO and the CFO or whatever that team might be, it's very clear that the guys and girls aren't on the same page. You sort of think, this one wants sales, and this one wants brand, and then this one wants short-term results, this one wants long-term results, this one wants a retainer, and this one wants a project. So it's almost as a supplier, in a sense, we come in and we end up sort of juggling 7 balls with 3 different sets of expectations, and it doesn't yield for a good relationship. So for us, when we work with companies, that's really important, because if we want to get those scale-up results and create the model and create something that's going to be sticky and work and all of the great and good stuff for scaling, culture is really important. And I suppose I would just say, from an agency perspective, if you're going to get an agency in, and if they don't ask you questions about the culture and the vision and the strategy and these sort of things, then they're probably not asking the right questions. And probably I'm just saying that as someone that gets asked to work with startups and scale-ups every week, So it's kind of, I think from our perspective, this is gold as well, because we want to work with companies and see companies flourish, but culture is really important in that. And the ability to bring a supplier in and say, right, here's what we're doing. Go on, boys, off you go. Make it happen. And that's perfect. That's really good stuff. The other side of that is, from our perspective, and I'm sure from your guys' perspective, we see a lot of companies that hit a lot of roadblocks because they don't have this sort of, this stuff in place. So, in other words, they get some initial funding, they test the market, and they just don't really get any traction, and they don't know how to evolve. Now, that's a whole different session in itself, but I think we've spoken a lot about scale-ups, and how to scale, particularly, I suppose, Seb and Jeffrey, but John and Pier Paolo as well. You said earlier on, I can't remember the exact stat, you've met over 1,000 companies and invested in 8. So there's 992 that aren't sitting in the scale-up yay right now. They might be, but not with you guys. And Jeffrey, I know the number's very similar to you as well. So you're obviously investing in very few companies in comparison to what you're seeing. So are there some common pitfalls? There's some common things that, you know, a bit of a big question, but are there any golden threads where you just, you know, the buzz has been, you know, fairly early on or late on?
I mean, we've probably got so many of these, right? Yeah, like there are some weird ones that this is going to sound like cheating, but if you're not a Series C company raising 100 million, try not to get a broker to be approaching funds. That's a great way to stop yourself progressing through at that early stage, because we expect to see the founder invested. We expect to see the founders or the CEO and the CEOs talk to them about their strategy. We want to be living and breathing it. I can't remember who said it. It was another VC in the US, but he said something like, you know, a founder's job should be setting strategy, raising money, and making people happy or something. And obviously that's a bit tongue in cheek, but if you're not out there raising the money yourself at the very earliest stage, before, you know, when you're raising 50 plus million, okay, fine, it's different. But when you're raising sub 10 million quid, which is still a lot of money, but sub 10 million quid, you should definitely be doing it yourself. By all means, use financial advisors to help you put decks together, etc. But you should be the one approaching funds. Don't get a broker to do it. That is a big proportion of the companies we see. We actually find that to be a real turn-off, because we're like, well, on the one hand, the founder is being efficient, but on the other hand, how do we know they're in the detail of the pitch and everything they're talking about? It just doesn't ring right. It doesn't sit right with us. So that's probably, I guess, one pitfall. And another pitfall, which, again, that one's a bit of a niche one, but it's one that's very easy to fall into. The other one is how you, I know it sounds silly as well, how do you meet the VC? If you send the pitch deck, people find people on LinkedIn and they just try and add them, that's not a great way to get to know somebody, particularly if on the VC's site, a lot of VC's profiles say, please send me an email, happy to answer an email, and they add them on LinkedIn. They don't get a response there. Email them. Any good VC should email you back, despite what people say about, you know, the cold email. It might be delayed, but they'll get back to you. But the best way is events. Events, people have let their guard down. They're here talking to people. But those are two things that I've found personally. But I'm sure you've got tons more.
And yeah, again, you know, we are slightly earlier stage, so our what we see is slightly different. I mean, our funnel, if you can call it a funnel, about 40% of companies, the pitches that we get, we don't actually see them because they fall out at that stage. And a lot of that is because, I think you said it earlier, it's because of how to present the pitch, how to present their deck. The information is not there, is not coherent, and we don't understand what the problem is, what it is they're trying to solve. I mean, the amount of times I've gone through a deck and probably 10 to 15 slide in, you're just trying to now figure out what is this all about. You know, it's just hard work. I think that's a big pitfall for us in terms of, you know, trying to get companies through. We see about, I mean, we invest about 2 to 2.5% of what we see typically. So we see quite a bit and invest quite a little. For me, that's the biggest pitfall. I mean, the low is more. I mean, you can go through it in, you know, forever. But yeah, I think that's probably the biggest one for us.
What you say is seen is right. Yeah, you see 1,000 or see 800, but you don't actually physically see them. You see the deck, and most, just turn down. But just following that formula for doing the deck is a great start.
That's brilliant. That's fantastic. And I think, again, to answer my own question, guys, I don't need you. I can just do the panel session myself. No, I think one of the challenges we see, we're often in a B2B environment as well, is when someone talking about value prop and answering the problem. You know, when a founder or when someone's sort of in the ideation phase, yeah, but there's so many things we can do. We answer this, and this, and we've got 5 markets and 5 solutions, and it's just so much. And then you say, yeah, but what is the value proposition? You've got 5 there. What's the one? How do those 5 particular features or benefits actually wrap up into a market-ready value proposition, as opposed to, yeah, but we could do this for this and that for that. And I think being able to scale down your ideas, we're talking about scaling up, but actually scaling down ideas into a single coherent message. Now, underneath that, as complexity is. Of course, you might have 5 different markets and 5 different tailored approaches to those markets, or your product may be cut up in 5 different ways. It's absolutely fine. But the value proposition at the top end of it needs to be clear. It needs to be 1, not 5. And I think that's a really, really common problem that we come across, is that what are we actually marketing and communicating here? Because actually, when you get to the top end of it, it sounds like every other business. You're just doing it a little bit, maybe a little bit smarter, or a little bit different, or you might think you're amazing, but I'm not actually sure. So I think just really work hard at creating that single compelling message. Not trying to say to simplify a complex solution, oversimplify it. But if there's not a single compelling message, it's always diluted. And, if Jeffrey's sitting there saying, well, 10 slides in, I'm still trying to work out what you do, you're not going to get very far. And the reason that he's getting that is because 10 slides in, the team are still trying to work out what they do, because they do everything. They do anything. Yeah, but we could do it for this and for that and for the others. So really work hard at that value proposition piece, because that's what these guys are saying. That's what's going to maybe get you the meeting with people like this. So, yeah, really work hard at that. And, again, if you're approaching an agency or an external supplier, tell them what you want. Don't give them carte blanche. Don't come to an agency and say, I want loads of campaigns. You're going to get a whacking great big bill. Tell people what you want, and then they can work with you on it. So next question, last question from me. We've had lots of nuggets of wisdom, lots of brilliant input today. But if you could give one piece of advice, and the room is very diverse. I know we've got scale-up companies that have scale. We've got startups. We've got investors. We've got all sorts of people in the room. So I know this is quite a hard question to answer. But if you could give one, I suppose, piece of advice or one final piece to a startup that's looking to scale, what would it be?
I guess for me, it's kind of 2 pieces of advice, actually. It is to set milestones into focus, and laser focus on your milestones. Obviously, you need to think it through very well, but once you've set that, you really need to focus and go from milestone to milestone in order to scale. I think a lot of founders that come to us have great ideas and great products, and actually, the better the product is, the more avenues they can get pulled. And it's really, really important to focus, and obviously part of focusing is setting milestones. I think that's probably the most important thing.
I was going to say exactly that. It's like I mentioned in my presentation the OKR process, and some of the most successful organizations in the world are using that process, which is just working absolutely fine. So it's very simple. Very simple. One objective, maximum 2-3 key results to measure your progress periodically, whether it's a quarter, half a year, and then you reset another objective. So that will be my piece of advice.
Yeah, I think if I was to give one piece of advice, it would be become customer-centric very early. So that by becoming customer-centric, it means changing your product roadmap according to customers' needs, wants, desires, discussions. And if you become that, you force yourself to sell, because you can't sell without, you can't get feedback without selling. And you also prevent inefficient product time and tech time spent building products that aren't useful. So becoming customer-centric right from the beginning, and ensuring that as your team grows, you break up any close relationships with product and tech if they're 2 separate divisions, if they are starting to become quite insular and not customer-centric, because you'll spend a lot of wasted money otherwise.
And for me, I suppose, again, from a legal perspective, it's about raising awareness, really, your own awareness and that of your team about the basic issues that should be on your radar, the basic tax reliefs that might be available for your investors, and how you might introduce the idea of sharing equity with your team. Regulations that might apply to the supply of your goods and or services, consumer protection regulations, data protection, and so forth. So really it's about being aware of that and skilling yourself up. It's good to see that if it happens. Brilliant.
Those are all Instagram quotes right there. Fantastic, fantastic. nuggets of wisdom and advice there. We've got about, not long, about 3 or 4 minutes. Open the floor, so into the lion's den. I've got a question already from David, so I'm gonna read it out and I'm gonna just fire it to you guys. Then we've got time for a couple more questions. So put your hands up first. Our product is bought by license fee by businesses for tens of thousands of pounds for an annual license. We have a handful of paying clients from my previous career as a consultant. The purchase is made at head of department level or above. What is the best digital marketing approach? Technically, we're in a position to scale fast and immediately. We might be best to answer that question. I talked to you about this off the microphone. See you later. Because I think that's a question where a company's ready to scale, is ready to route to market, proven a concept, ready to scale and test the market further with new client acquisition, looking at short-term value of clients, looking at some of those metrics that Seb put out earlier on. So I think the answer is a cross between what Seb and Jeffrey and Pierre Paolo have been saying around getting those metrics in place and then running test campaigns. Test and review, test and review, test and review. It is scary the amount of times clients come to us, and again, it frustrates leaving daylights at me because there's no budget in it for us. But they go, yeah, I've spent hundreds of thousands of pounds on an agency. What did you do? Did a big brand campaign. What happened? Don't know. Just why? Just run test and review campaigns. Test audiences, A/B test messaging. If it's a B2B proposition that's quite niche, then really hone in on that message. Make sure that you can and really work at cost per acquisition costs. What is it? And a genuine cost per acquisition models, not just the lead cost, but the cost and the sales life cycle, all of that process. Test it. Let's work on that on a test and review model, a test and review process, and then model it out. So there's lots of tactics within that we can discuss, later on. But I think strategically, a lot of that question aligns with what Seb said. What does it take to win the next 10 customers? Who are they and why are they? Then you can start to create a model. So you've got your early adopters, you've got those that have jumped on board out of relationship. Was it because of relationship? Was it because of the product? So I could fire thousands of questions back now, but I think forming a test and review strategy is really key because that gives you some metrics and some ability to then scale that out. Does that make sense? But there's lots of tactics to do that as well. And often, again, low cost, it's utilizing what's already in the locker. So when we're working with clients, we're sitting there going, what's already in the locker? Oh, you've already got a database. You've already got a network. You've already got a route to market. Utilize that first. Everyone wants to, we're going to run loads of big paid media campaigns and take over the world. Well, if you've got the budget for that and you want to, the spray and pray approach, fine. But actually a much more strategic, linear approach really works in our opinion, particularly in a B2B market, because it's not really a spray and pray market. Sometimes it's different with consumers, where you've got a big top end of the funnel and you need to really drive a larger top line metrics. But if the funnel is quite specific, then be specific in your approach. Does that make sense? But tactically, I'm more than happy to discuss that with you. Brilliant. Couple more questions. Lady at the back. Have we got a microphone? Or do you want to take this one? See?
We forecast to make a good profit within the first 12 months. We have very happy investors. They're a very small part of the company. So now we want to scale again. We know that we've got scale proven, but now we want national scale. I didn't do the VC pitch thing. They approached me. I didn't do that. I don't know how this works. How the hell do I go about jumping into VC having had no experience from the beginning? What am I saying that I want?
I guess what are you saying how do I approach VCs? Do I want VC funding? Yeah.
Do I want VC funding? What am I asking them for? BAD?
Yeah.
What am I saying? We've had £2.5 million. We're going to make a profit on that. We've had the funding for 5 months. We're already in profit. We've got half of the money left in the bank.
You are in a fantastic position to raise money.
Profitable,
half 1.25 million cash in the bank.
We're very excited. But I'm an expert in my industry. I'm not an expert in capital, and nor am I an expert in business. So
who are your angel investors? Who was your round done by? The two, was it individuals?
Independent. They are VCs, and I believe they're involved in a lot of companies, but they were told about us by a customer, and they approached us.
Because I guess the first thing I would do if I were you would be, if there are any institutions there, to go and speak to them.
They are not keen.
They're not keen.
That is the interesting thing about it. The initial investors, don't talk to anybody. We're your best friends. You don't need anybody else.
Are they willing to fund you more?
And not to the scale that I want to go to. To their scale, they're very happy. We're making money. It's all very rosy. So what's very interesting is their influence is, let's just all stay as we are. Everything looks brilliant. It'll all just grow over 5 years now, no problem. But I see a much bigger market.
Are they an institution? Sorry to question it so much because it just sounds quite crazy. I guess we invest at the early stage. I mean, Jeffrey very early, me early. And if we've got a company that's doing well, we will be egging them on to raise more money if they're profitable, because we'll be saying you've got all that profit you could be putting into the business to grow it further. Plus, you've got 1.25 million of cash, so you hold all the cards. You can go to the market and speak to loads of VCs. We'll introduce you to loads of them. In fact, to be honest, if you're profitable, you've got 1.25 million in the bank, and your unit economics are good. I guess I don't know what your unit economics are, but if your unit economics are good, then you're highly attractive. Particularly at this stage, I guess you must be trying to raise maybe a £5 million check, a Series A check. Are you?
I honestly don't know also what to fish for, because what I learned from the first round, if you like, they approached and said, well, what do you need? And I gave them a figure, and they put it in the bank. Okay. Feeling a little more keen.
I guess there's a few people. If we want to go quasi pitch for a second, I don't know whether it's, but there's a couple of questions. It's like, what's your revenue at the moment, and what was the valuation of the last round? Because those two things dovetail quite nicely together. And then we could probably go from there. Like where?
What do I do? Do I Google VC companies and send them pitch decks and all this
I'm
learning today?
So speak to us today. We can introduce some other people as well. We need to see more. Every VC you speak to will need to see some hard stats before they help. And then if you're looking attractive, they will syndicate you out. If not, they'll say these are the problems. And it is events, and emailing directly through their websites.
Okay.
And VCs should get back to you. I know for a fact we do it. I know Octopus. I've got a lot of friends there. They have a policy of answering back to emails. Yeah, Jeffrey has a policy like the idea that the cold email doesn't work is not true. It's just a delayed response often. Okay. So I think it does sound strange, though, that your current investors, given where you're at, don't want you to raise further capital.
Well, not at the moment. They want me to just sit tight and just continue and prove this, because it's 5 months. It's 5 months in, wait a little while longer, and I'm sure they think they have a plan. But I just want to be very aware that their plan might not be the best plan for me or the business. It might be their best plan for them.
Fair enough.
Is that something that you've seen before?
I have to say, in your situation, I have not seen this.
Okay.
Yeah, where your business is doing what it's doing, and the investors are saying, sit back. I mean, it might be the case that you've grown your revenue 100k, and they're saying, sit back. What you can go and raise at what valuation you're at now is too low. Hold off for a bit. And you're thinking, no, I've done 100k, it's awesome. I don't know what's relative in your mind. What I'm thinking in my mind is you've done £1 million and you're looking for the next 4 million of revenue.
We have we've made, if you like, we've brought in, income is 3 million so far, and we have contracts out for another 10 million. So they should be in by the end of the year.
I think you could comfortably raise a Series A.
Right, okay. But that's all from a small investment. I wouldn't have been able to do it without the investors initially. I just needed that bit of a bump for marketing, and so we've been able to do.
And that was your only funding round, was the 2.5 million quid?
Yeah, I've had 1.25 so far. I haven't taken the next money off them.
Okay. I definitely think you could be looking to raise further money.
People like yourselves that do that. VCs, okay.
Yeah. So go to VCs.
See, I'm a dummy with all this stuff.
Yeah. No. I guess it's literally search London venture capital firms.
Okay.
And there are a couple of I think one's called Entrepreneur's Handbook, is a website, and on there it's not exhaustive though. It's only, it's actually the biggest VCs, and the problem with the biggest is they're great. I was talking to people in break, but if you go with the biggest, you have signaling risk if you slip up. So you've got to decide: are you ready to go pedal to the metal and not make any more mistakes, or are you still learning, iterating? And if you are, you want to be looking around. But yeah, start with Entrepreneur's Handbook, and then just look on Crunchbase for London-based VCs.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. One more question? Go in. No, two people put their hands up. Right. The gentleman in the greens asked a question. Okay, we're going to do two more then. Go for it.
Exactly. So it may be a little bit more complicated than what you can answer now, but just in that early stage where you're validating an idea, looking to build an MVP, take it to market, start testing, etc. Obviously, there are so many ways to do that in terms of building it yourself, getting contractors in, potentially going to a company that has the existing technology you need, and then just slightly, obviously, altering it for the application that you need it for. In terms of later down the line, when hypothetically, it becomes a success, etc., it ticks all the boxes that you need as an investor. If you then look back and went, oh, okay, at the beginning, you didn't build the technology, you're entirely reliant on the technology partnership for the success of this company. How does that work at that later stage in terms of the value of the company? And is it to do with IP and who owns that? Who owns the IP of the technology? So is it better at the earlier stage to rather build it yourself and contract, or in terms of having a reliable partnership, is that something you see quite a bit?
I guess the way it would work in reality is that in the initial discussions that we would have with you, that would come out as a discussion. And we would probably want you to assign that or get that assigned across to the business so that you protect for that very same event happening. It would be, if that were not to happen, I think you'd be in a situation where you'd, like John said, you'd seriously risk devaluing the sale price later on. It would always be better to try and have that conversation with the potential investors up front and let them help you go through the process of how you get all of that assigned across. Either way works, I guess. If it is you're going to be using existing technology, especially for MVPs, it's always quick and easy to do that way. It's just a matter of how you manage that process of getting the IP into the business, or having licenses for it.
Last question. Last but not least. Microphone's coming your way. There we go.
So I was going to ask, what's the, from your perspective, where do you draw the line between companies that should not come for VC? So if we go along yes, I've seen all the metrics, I've had all the stats. Of course, as you said, they're profitable companies that do that. They don't necessarily go for VC. Some people would do organic growth. Is there something in your mind? Obviously, everyone's chasing tech, unicorn, whatever. But from your perspective and how you would look at companies, do you kind of draw the line between sort of consultancy expertise background, and what is more sexy to you? Is it just metrics and nothing else?
Yeah, I understand. I guess it's part art, part science, really. For me, it really comes down to the founders. You can have, so it's two things: it's the founder ambitions, and then it's the actual potential of the actual underlying business or product or whatever. If a founder, and if you're taking VC investment, exactly like Seb said, you're taking it on the knowledge that you have to give these investors back their money with, and then some. And you have to be aligned with that. So you have to want to do that. You have a lot of cases where you have founders who either don't understand that, they are entering into an agreement like that, or unconsciously just want a lifestyle business. And part of the due diligence or the assessment that we do is to try and understand, where is this founder coming from? Is there a line metric-wise? I guess there is, but just what a large part of what we try to do is kind of figure that question out. Obviously, their metrics will be applied to the business itself, but in terms of the founders, it really is trying to feel out, are these people do these people want to go on that journey? Are they resilient enough to kind of take the knocks that come along the way? And that's the approach we would take.
Yeah, it's really interesting what you say, because at your stage, presumably, it's all about that team. There's no metrics that can bear out at that point. At our stage, there's very early metrics. I mean, you've got enough stats data to have the metrics, but they're early to the point where you can't show trends from them. So the metrics are definitely not the decider for whether it's a VC backable business or not. The only one I would caveat that with is month on month MRR growth, or if it's not a SaaS business, monthly revenue growth. If that's not growing in the first year, realistically, in the first year at 20% a month, or at least over 10% a month, then it's probably not a VC backable business in the midterm. There's this rule of thumb which is just that. I mean, take it with a pinch of salt, but it's that a top tier VC backed business will triple its revenue in the first 2 years after investment, will double it in the 3 years after that, will do 50% in the year after that. So if you're not able or willing, and willing is a key one, it's like most people don't want to do that, right? If you're not able or willing to do that, then it's probably not a VC business. And the problem, particularly in the millennial generation, is that we're so exposed to VC as a funding source that people think it's the funding source, and then when they get turned down, they feel quite, well, rightly disheartened. And actually, it's a funding source for a very, very small percentage of companies, and most will be better with more patient angel investment, and not trying to go for it.
Fantastic. We are out of time, unfortunately. We could hear these guys all day, got some brilliant nuggets, and as Seb said, I think events like this seem to really bring out some really great insights. So just a big round of applause to John, Seb, Pierre, Paolo, and Jeffrey. Thank you, guys.